You're looking at a map of Europe. It's 2022. The continent is about to experience a winter without Russian natural gas for the first time in half a century. Politicians are giving speeches about unity and resilience. Economists are forecasting recession. But the real story isn't on the news, it's beneath your feet. It's a story written in steel and pressure, a continental-scale system that, for decades, quietly rewired the political and economic landscape of an entire hemisphere. This is The Energy Historian, and today we're uncovering how natural gas pipelines didn't just connect nations, they divided continents. Think of a continent's energy system not as a collection of countries, but as a single, living organism. Its arteries are pipelines. For Europe, the heart of that system, for generations, was the massive gas field at Urengoy in western Siberia. Discovered in 1966, it was a monster, one of the largest natural gas fields on the planet. And in the 1970s, the Soviet Union made a monumental decision. They wouldn't just use this gas for themselves, they would build arteries west to Europe. The first major pipeline, the Brotherhood Pipeline, was completed in 1967. It was a feat of engineering, stretching thousands of kilometers through the brutal terrain of the Soviet Union and into satellite states. It was also a geopolitical masterstroke. The Soviet Union wasn't just selling a commodity, it was selling dependency, one molecule at a time. Here's the high-impact realization. You don't conquer a continent with tanks. You connect it with pipelines. The infrastructure becomes the strategy. For Western Europe, particularly a divided Germany, the offer was irresistible. Here was abundant, relatively cheap energy to fuel the post-war economic miracle. It was a pragmatic deal. The Soviets got hard currency, billions of Deutsche Marks, and later euros, to prop up their struggling economy. West Germany got the heat and power for its factories and homes. The first major contract, signed in 1970 between West Germany and the Soviet Union, was called the Gas for Pipes deal. Germany would supply high-quality steel pipe, which the Soviets lacked the technology to produce, and in return, they'd get Siberian gas. The pipeline literally built the trade relationship, and with every new contract, every pipeline extension, Nord Stream 1, Yamal Europe, the vast network stretching into Italy and France, the connection deepened. By 2021, before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia supplied about 40% of the European Union's natural gas. For Germany, it was over 50%. The system looked stable, efficient, and locked in. The dependency was complete. But this created a hidden architectural tension. Natural gas, unlike oil, is notoriously difficult to move around. You can put oil on a tanker and send it anywhere in the world. Gas needs to be either pumped through a fixed pipeline or supercooled into a liquid, loaded onto a specialized billion-dollar tanker, shipped across an ocean, and then turned back into a gas at a multi-billion-dollar import terminal. For decades, the pipeline was the cheaper, simpler option. But that simplicity came with a brutal structural catch. A pipeline is a point-to-point weapon. You can't reroute it. The gas flows where the steel goes, and whoever controls the valve controls the destiny of the nation at the other end. So Europe built its modern industrial economy on a source it could not physically control. The pipeline map became a map of leverage, and this leverage was tested repeatedly. In 2006, and again in 2009, Russia cut off gas supplies to Ukraine over pricing disputes. The pipelines to Europe ran through Ukraine. When the valve closed in Ukraine, the gas stopped flowing to Germany, Italy, and Austria in the dead of winter. This wasn't a theoretical vulnerability, it was a physical shock. Factories slowed, governments scrambled, the continent got a chilling preview of its own fragility. The system was working perfectly. It was just being used for a different purpose than Europe had assumed. Now look at a different continent, North America. The geography is similar in scale, a massive landmass with energy resources, often far from population centers. But the pipeline architecture tells a completely different story. In the United States and Canada, pipelines don't cross hostile international borders to reach their primary market. They cross state lines and regulatory jurisdictions but they move within a single, integrated continental market. The web is dense, complex, and largely internal. The great pipeline debates in North America, like the Keystone XL saga, were about moving Canadian oil sands crude to the U.S. Gulf Coast, or moving shale gas from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. They were arguments about economics and environment, yes, but not about a foreign power holding a strategic valve over the entire system. This architectural difference created a divergence in destiny. Europe's energy security became a question of geopolitics and diplomacy. North America's became a question of regulation and infrastructure permitting. One was a game of chess played between states. The other was a complex legal and engineering puzzle played within a state. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and the pipeline shut down, Europe faced an existential energy crisis. Prices spiked over 300% in a matter of months. The continent had to perform a near instantaneous rewiring of its entire energy organism. It scrambled for liquefied natural gas tankers from the United States and Qatar. It reopened coal plants. It begged for conservation. Here's another spike. A continent's strategic options are determined by its pipeline endpoints. Europe's ended in Siberia. It had to build new ones at sea in a panic. North America, watching the crisis, experienced something else, a staggering financial windfall. U.S. LNG export terminals, many of which were built on speculative bets a decade earlier, suddenly became the most valuable infrastructure on the planet. The United States transformed, almost overnight, from a nervous gas importer to the world's largest gas exporter. The gas was the same. The molecules were identical. But the pipeline and port infrastructure, the system, allowed it to become a global strategic tool. The money that once flowed from Berlin to Moscow now flowed from Rotterdam and Wilhelmshaven to Houston and Lake Charles. But this gets to the final and most profound division. The pipeline didn't just divide Europe from Russia or Europe from North America. It created a deeper, more fundamental rift in how we think about energy itself. Europe's traumatic decoupling from pipeline gas has accelerated a conscious, desperate pivot toward what it calls strategic autonomy. This means renewables, yes, but also hydrogen networks, mega batteries, and a new obsession with electricity as the primary energy carrier because electrons can be generated anywhere and move with more flexibility. Their vision is a decentralized, digitized, post-molecule grid. North America, flush with cheap shale gas, and now a global LNG king, is doubling down on the molecule. New pipelines are being debated. LNG export terminals are expanding. The energy discussion is about dominance in the fossil era, not an exit from it. The same crisis is producing two opposite civilizational impulses, one toward radical decentralization, the other toward supercharged consolidation. So the pipeline, this simple tube of steel, accomplished something few weapons or treaties ever could. It silently aligned economies for decades, making them rich and comfortable, while simultaneously planting the seeds for their greatest crisis. It didn't just transport gas, it transported political reality. It created a world where a technical pricing dispute in Kiev could freeze apartments in Bologna. It forced a continent to stare into the abyss of its own infrastructure and see, not resilience, but a single glaring point of failure. The quiet truth is this: we build our infrastructure during times of peace, under assumptions of perpetual stability. We optimize for cost and efficiency. The pipelines were the optimal solution. But then, history turns. The map changes, and we are left with the brutal geometry we created, a network of dependencies that can be weaponized with the turn of a wheel. Europe is now living in the explosive unwinding of that 50-year project. North America is living in its financial harvest. Both are living with the divisions the pipeline wrought. The ground beneath our feet, it turns out, was never neutral. It was the first draft of the future's conflict. If this gave you a new perspective on the silent architecture of power, hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments what's the next hidden system we should uncover.